to describe to you some of the things that have been bouncing around in my head since I've been here in the department. It's been a rather wild ride with the advent of these new invasive insects that have come to be important in our area. First of all, just a brief description of my background. I spent most of my time before I came out east in Washington State. I was training as an undergraduate as a botanist and enjoying it. And then I noticed my favorite trees were being killed by a bug. And I started to get into it, and it was the balsam woolly Adelgid. Immediately I started scratching my head and thinking, wow, bugs are cool. Well, that was it. I was sunk. I did my senior thesis on the bark chemistry of Abies lasiocarpa, infested with balsam woolly Adelgid, looking for a potential defensive mechanism, which still we have yet to find. Then I started grad school and couldn't get any money to study the balsam woolly Adelgid, so they sent me up to Alaska to study bark beetles on spruce trees, and that was really cool. Fishing was great. I worked on the natural enemies of bark beetles there, and then I went down to Berkeley and started working on a number of bugs, finally working again on the natural enemies of bark beetles in California pines, primarily Monterey pine, and I actually shipped millions of insects down to Australia to try and get biocontrol going. So here we are in New York State, a tale of two bugs. I should have made it just one bug, and the byline is there's something for everybody. You know, you guys, the stories are really compelling, really interesting. Is there a way to turn down the lights in the front, do you know?
Yep, right back here.
You got it? Oh, perfect. You don't need to see me, but the slides are pretty cool. I'm going to talk about the Hemlock woolly Adelgid and the emerald ash borer, two bugs that we have around here or are close by. But you know, it's like, this isn't it. And there are many other things. Knocking at our doors, the 1,000-pound gorilla, the Asian longhorn beetle, which I hope we don't ever be talking about, but I'm not too sure about that. It's a big problem. And then the new one on the block is the 1,000 cankers disease of black walnut trees. This is a big problem. It's very similar to Dutch elm disease, and it's gotten its foothold in the East Coast right now. But that's it for those. The Hemlock woolly Adelgid, I love Adelgids. They are just so interesting. They're just this big bag of protoplasm. They stick their stylets into the tree and they suck the juice out. Simple, right? Not really. It's got the most complex life cycle of any bug I've ever met. And it comes from, this perhaps comes from, the ones we have on the East Coast come from Japan, genetically identical to strains from Japan. We also have it on the West Coast. When I was growing up, learning forest entomology in Washington State, it was on the hemlock trees, but I never learned about it. It was never a problem. It's genetically very different from the one we have here. And we always banter it around. Oh, is it a different species? Well, I don't know. How do you tell when you just got a big bag of protoplasm? Big bag, small bag of protoplasm. It's about 1 millimeter right here. This is the adult. Basically what they do is they have a very interesting life cycle, very different from a lot of other bugs, in that they spend their summer like this, in a resting stage, with their stylets inserted into the bark of a twig of the hemlock tree. It's convenient. When are most of the predators out? Summertime. What do you look like? This little tiny dot. It's not doing anything. It's really good. So in the summertime, they're estivating. July, August, September. Then they start to grow. October, November, they start to grow. They get fatter and fatter. And then they begin to lay their eggs. Probably, pretty close to right about now. It's so warm here. They're very temperature dependent, and their development is closely tied to the warm temperatures. I haven't seen eggs yet, but they're getting close. They lay these eggs, there's these little things right here, and they are all underneath this white woolly mass right here. Right about mid-March, the eggs hatch, and the only dispersal phase is called a crawler. This is 1 millimeter in size. That crawler is like about 0.2 of a millimeter. It's really small, but if you look at it under a microscope, it's really cool. It moves fast. Those legs, they can get around really quickly. So how does this thing disperse? It's small. It makes logical sense that wind will carry it. It'll drop down from the crown of the tree down to the lower branches. but it's also been found on the feet of birds. And when you think about it, a bird lands on a twig, its foot's around there, the crawler just jumps right on it. The next place it goes is probably another twig it can jump off of to. Far more efficient than being blown in the wind. Really interesting thing to think about. It's only been found in one study, I think, where they've actually looked at it and washed off the legs, the feet of birds. But I think it is a really common way, a very efficient way of getting around. So the second generation, the first generation lays their eggs, they hatch, they mature. If the food is degraded to a point where it's unacceptable or it's getting lower in quality, they'll actually form a sexual generation. That sexual generation will fly off as a winged adult, okay? And so when you get food degradation in these populations, it sets up population fluctuations where this portion of the population just sort of disappears. In Japan, there's spruce trees that are susceptible, and they'll go to the spruce and they'll have a sexual generation in Japan. Here, none of the native spruce trees will support the population, so they disappear, except for about 5 trees right on the slope just behind Bruckner. I'm waiting for that. So here they just disappear. It's like a vacuum cleaner. They're gone, and then the ones that stay on the tree will lay the eggs. The egg will hatch. The crawler will come out. The crawler will settle, and it'll look like that. That's the life cycle in a nutshell. It's actually very complicated, and I made it way too simple, but that's okay. Host trees in North America. Eastern hemlock are the one, of course, we're most concerned about here. Carolina hemlock, though, is a really important species in the southern Appalachians. This actually is an eastern hemlock in the southern Appalachians. See that dot down there? That's a guy standing there right next to the tree. Just huge trees in the south. I've never been there. I'd love to see these trees. This one was actually saved. Most of them have not. And then western hemlock in the west. There's also mountain hemlock in the west. Apparently it's not infected. We don't know why. Interesting thing to me, and the thing that gives me hope, is that when I was out west one time visiting my parents, I went to the Arboretum in Seattle. And I said, do you have any eastern hemlocks planted? They said, oh yeah, we have them right here, planted in 1945. They brought me over to them, and there they were right next to the western hemlocks. Both of them had hemlock woolly Adelgids on them just as much as the other, and both of them look great. Why, I don't know. Is it a different species out there? A different chemistry? What do they do? We really don't know. The impact on the forest, though, is the thing to think about. We consider hemlock a keystone species, very important for birds, for wildlife, and modifying the habitat makes the soil a bit more acid. It's I guess one of the things that I think about is it's something that's an aesthetic thing around here, especially. And I was actually visiting out west in the Las Vegas area, and we went to this little thing where they had kids running around to different stations, and there was this guy doing a nature thing there. And we got to talking, and he was from Cornell. Oh, great! The next thing he said is, "Man, I miss that place. Those hemlocks were really beautiful." I didn't even pay him to say that, but it really is. The hemlocks, we're in danger right now around here. This is the current distribution. Why that's there, I have no idea. This is pretty much the current distribution. We have a couple new counties right here. But really, it got started in 1957 around Richmond, is what we think. And it sort of piddled around for a while. Then gradually, when it got into the Appalachians, it started to go crazy. We got into those hemlock forests. And you can see the current distribution. It totally encompasses the distribution of Carolina hemlock. And then it comes all the way up here, and it's further up here into Maine right now. It's not really going much further up into Vermont and New Hampshire. It's throughout the Hudson River Valley right now as well. It's moving slowly up at the northern part of the range. And temperature is one of the most important features we feel, reasons limiting its distribution. The Adelgids, the balsam lily Adelgid and the hemlock lily Adelgid have been known to be affected by low temperatures. There's been studies that have shown that temperatures of minus 25 degrees Celsius will kill all the population. And there's field evidence also that shows that it's limited by very low temperatures. And so you think about it, and you think about where it is and what the temperatures look like. So here we are in this area here. I was thinking we were sort of safe up here because it was really cold. It's not really cold. The Delaware water gap right now is going through a lot of mortality. Looks pretty similar, doesn't it? And indeed, there's a study, Dave Orwig at Harvard First just did a study, just came out, a really interesting study of a number of plots in central Massachusetts, and found that indeed he correlated a number of different stand factors with it, and they found that the only factors that really explained the distribution of the hemlock woolly adelgid were temperature and latitude. So it's very, it's like the temperature thing is really closely tied to it. And it was the coldest temperatures, it was average cold temperatures in January that he was talking about. But you have to consider with insects, oftentimes when it gets really warm, they'll come out of their estivation and they'll lose some of that cold hardiness. And then if you get hit them with the cold temperature, that'll take them out. So it's not as simple as just cold temperatures in January. Here we have the coldest temperatures between 1980 and 2006, thanks to Art Gitano here, the Northeast Regional Climate Center. We're in a banana belt in here. And it is indeed spreading throughout the Finger Lakes. Here's a study done by Talbot Schroeder, who actually came up here and worked with me in doing temperature around the Finger Lakes, where it's really hard to understand, but basically every year in the blue, it will survive. There's no question about it. When you get up to the red, there's like every 50 years there'll be a year where it will survive. Okay? But basically, he did a tremendous amount of work, and it's a very interesting study. However, we have the example of the balsam woolly adelgid. Also limited by cold temperatures, first introduced in 1930 in eastern Canada, spread to the Pacific Northwest. It was thought to be restricted to coastal areas because it was not tolerant of cold temperatures. Well, as I was a grad student, I was saying, well, I've seen it over the crest of the Cascades. What's going on? And nobody would say anything. It was like, this is not really valuable. What, fir trees? They're not valuable. Why bother? Since then, it has moved over the Cascades into the grand fir areas of the Intermountain West, and it has moved out of the coastal areas and into the regions of the interior of the East Coast. And indeed, I saw it up near the top of Mount Washington. Not very warm up there, is it? This is what it looks like in the Adirondacks, high in the Adirondacks. This is a really important species in wetlands in the Adirondacks. It could be, it's like a really important habitat species. I've seen trees in Washington State look like this for 30 years. It doesn't move very quickly, but then if you go to Bear Swamp, just right over here by Skinny Atlas Lake, there's a stand of native balsam fir. How they got there, I don't have any idea, but they have stem infestations and they're dying right now. So it's something to think about. Adelgids do change, even though they're all females. Oh, I forgot to say that. They're all females. No males. It's really convenient. There's no fooling around. And indeed, you have 2 generations a year. The average egg production for hemlock woolly adelgids is probably about 200 eggs per female. So from one individual at the beginning of the season, at the end of that year, you could have potentially 40,000 progeny. There's also a mutation rate associated with that. And when you're all asexual, mutation is what you do. So anyway, there is the potential for that to change. And indeed, when you think about it, climate change, how long is it going to be before, like in the southern Appalachians, where mortality by the hemlock woolly adelgid is like every 4 years probably? Up here, probably about 17 years or more. I don't know. I don't know how fast it's going to be. Our first detection in the Finger Lakes was right around this area, 2008. I saw it around here. This is where our first mortality is. It's only 4 years later, and we've got some mortality, which is like the southern Appalachians. You get up into northern Massachusetts, 17 years they're talking about in some places. See the trees perfectly happy. So it's like there's something going on, definitely limited by cold, but maybe there's an environmental factor as well that's benefiting the physiology of the tree to cope with the insect. We don't know. We don't know the resistance mechanisms. This is the current distribution. Here you see we have it in Treeman Park. It's just got into Teganic Park, and it's in some of the natural areas here, and it's in Coy Glen. Watkins Glen State Park is a really bad infestation right now, as is up in Glenora Point, and we have it in the Finger Lakes National Forest, which is great, because now we have federal resources in this area, and they're helping, they're working with it. So, Chemical options actually, it's like I got into this business doing biological control because I hated all the chemicals that were being used in the forest. Now I see that chemicals are actually really good because they could help save species of trees. And with the hemlock woolly adelgid, we have options. Imidacloprid, which is something you find in flea collars for dogs. It's been around a long time. Nerve toxin. It's really interesting because it's effective for 7 years or more with just one treatment. And what happens is the imidacloprid gets up into the tree, but then after 1 year it goes away, but what it does is it changes into an olefin. And that olefin is actually more toxic to the hemlock woolly adelgid than is the regular chemical. So it's just amazing we have that tool. I think we need to use it judiciously right now in the parks. Great Smoky Mountain National Park, they're wanting to use pesticides in the parks, but they've got volunteers out there with backpacks full of imidacloprid tablets, trying to treat as many hemlock trees as possible to try and save the genome. Hemlock seed does not last very long in storage, I guess. And so that's one of the reasons they're doing it. We're really worried about that. Dinotefuran is a chemical that is very water soluble. They do a bark spray, it gets in really quickly. It's a neonicotinoid like the imidacloprid. Gets in really quickly, moves up fast. That's what we need to protect big trees, because big trees have compromised vascular systems. They don't draw the imidacloprid up very quickly, so it's a 1-2 punch. Dinotefuran and imidacloprid, and that's what they're using for the big trees in the south. And that's what we're actually talking about using in Watkins Glen State Park here sometime soon as we can get it figured out. But anyway, that's another story. New kid on the block, azadirachtin. Very interesting chemical. It's actually a distillate from the neem tree. If you're familiar with the neem tree, it was discovered actually by an entomologist working in Africa on the desert locust. And basically a locust cloud came through, stripped all the trees, except for this one that was standing there with green leaves. I said, what the heck's going on? Finally found out what it was, isolated it. Azadirachtin is the chemical that they isolated as being an insect growth regulator. It just stops it from growing, really. And now it's been, it took a long time. It was just extracted because they couldn't manufacture it synthetically. But they finally have done that, so the cost is down. It's registered for hemlock woolly adelgid and emerald ash borer. It's relatively environmentally benign, but we don't really know the efficacy. We're working on that right now. This is a brand new thing, but it's really cool because I feel much more comfortable using that than the neonicotinoids near water. What I really am excited though about is the biological control. It's been Leucobius nigrinus. It's a pterodontid beetle here. It's native to the Pacific Northwest. It's one of the most important predators of hemlock woolly adelgid in the Northwest. Is that also responsible for keeping the populations down in the Northwest? Well, it could be. They've released it at numerous sites on the East Coast, and since about 2002, they've been releasing it. But it was like every one of these meetings I went to, it was like everybody was downtrodden. Oh, where is this thing? It's like we've released it. What's going on? Just in January this year, it was like the big buzz. At one of the sites that they released it about 8 years ago, they finally got it, and in numbers, 8,000 adults from one location. So this is like a big bright spot on the horizon, that this thing actually does work, it gets going. I've released it at 4 locations in the Finger Lakes, and with 2 biotypes, one a Puget Sound biotype and an Idaho biotype. The Idaho biotype is supposedly, we're assuming, more cold tolerant. The Idaho biotype has established at the Finger Lakes National Forest, but we don't really know. I mean, they could be just going up there in very small numbers. I'm hoping that I'll be surprised in 8 years and find thousands of them, because the trees in that area in North Carolina where they just found it, they're actually looking not too bad, a lot better than they look around in other areas around there. So I have hope that this beetle will actually be one of the answers, but in all situations with biocontrol, it's a complex and not just one bug. So we need another one. This one is brand new, Scymnus camptodromus. It's been worked on by Melody Kina in the lab in Connecticut, and my friend Kelly Hoover at PS at Pennsylvania State. It has the closest synchrony with hemlock woolly adelgid life cycle of any predator that we've found. It's just going through EPA registration right now. It's gone through all the releases for host specificity. And I'm hoping actually to get a plantation of hemlock started and infest them here so we can start growing them in the wild with nets over them. They are very difficult to work with in the lab, and so we have to try field rearing. And so we're lined up to be the first place to get them if we can get this plantation going. It's because we're at the leading edge. This is the time to instill the biological control. And I'm really lucky, I think, to have come upon this opportunity. Part of that is basically working to establish permanent plots so we can evaluate how the natural enemies and our management tactics will work. Established in high priority hemlock stands, the state parks, Coy Glen is another one. I'm just beginning to put these plots in, taking canopy pictures like this so we can watch the change in canopy density over time. Besides just spending the time to really cut off twigs high up in the canopy and sample them, this is a quick and dirty method, hopefully, of looking at the efficacy for biocontrol and the use of pesticides. We have a complicating factor, though, and it's shown up in the Hudson Valley big time, and it's throughout Connecticut as well, the elongate hemlock scale. It was first detected in Bronx in 1908, okay, so Bronx in 1908. It hasn't spread very far out of that area. It's moved maybe up into a little bit into southern Massachusetts. It's moved up the Hudson Valley, about halfway up to one of the Kingston area. But it really is a big deal with hemlocks around there. I was just in Minnewaska State Park, and they are just absolutely plastered with these things. This is what it looks like. It's a little scale. It crawls in underneath the cuticle, inserts its stylets, and grows underneath the cuticle. So it grows in the summertime, though. And there are predators that have been released. There's a nidotulid beetle, and there's also a little parasitoid that go after it, but they just aren't effective enough at regulating the populations. Imidacloprid doesn't seem to work on it, but dinotefuran does. But the interesting thing, though, and the thing that really has got me scratching my head is what Evan Presser and Joe Elkington is calling exploitative competition between Hemlock woolly adelgid and the elongate hemlock scale. Basically, they find that what they did is they got a plantation, and they put elongate hemlock scale on some, they put hemlock woolly adelgid on others, and then they put them both on some as well. And they found that the ones that had both of them on them actually grew significantly better than the ones with just the one or the other on it. It's a very interesting situation. It gets very complicated, though, when you think about the different the variation in the life cycle in the numbers of hemlock woolly adelgid due to deterioration of host quality. And it's like when I was in Minnewaska, we were looking at trees, and they were filled with these elongate hemlock scales. And they were saying, well, where's the hemlock woolly adelgid? There was none there, or they said the year before they were just plastered. This is something that we need to work on. Heaven knows that there's a lot to work on. But it's a very interesting situation. So this is what they look like. First off, this is when a tree first gets infested with the hemlock woolly adelgid, just all over the place like that. As they live in this tree over time, they begin to look like this right here, just one or two every once in a while. Right now, this is where we're at in Finger Lakes. You see this everywhere, but they're becoming accustomed. They're much more common around here, and we're going to be having to deal with this for a long time, I think. Good. A little bit of time left over for this one. Emerald ash borer. This is a really, it's like I was actually at a meeting not too long ago, and I was sitting next to a friend of mine, and we were going to grad school together, and we were talking about old times, and for some reason we looked over at one another, and we said, basically had the same thing on our minds. Somebody was talking about emerald ash borer. We said, 15 years ago, would you have thought that this would be a problem bug? No. It's like, who wouldn't have? I mean, it's like, there's hundreds of species in the genus Agrilus plant, in North America. Very specific for the host plant, highly specific for the host plant. But they're just like, the rest of native bugs. They're sort of like the lion at the back of the pack of antelope, taking out the weak ones. Never really ever becoming aggressive. And so this one shows up, and I just couldn't believe it. I was slapping myself. I just like, what? Have you pressed it? But this is real. It is a big problem, and it's, you know, it's like there's something for everybody. I thought, yeah, you know, bugs. This is cool. It's really pretty. But I tell you, you know, this is a bug with baggage. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And I've been doing a lot of outreach on this bug around the state, and it's been fascinating to me. You know, the biology is interesting. I'm committed to trying to do the most I can to stop this thing from killing all the ash, which it could do. But it's the people that have been absolutely fascinated in their reaction to what's going on. You know, it is a beautiful bug. I got to admit, I don't think I've worked on a more beautiful one. There's the female and the male. The male actually has a beard right here. That's how you tell them apart. You know, basically the quick story is first detected near Detroit, Michigan in 2002, but it actually was there in the 90s. And I was actually giving a talk in Niagara County. And afterwards, this older fellow comes up to me sort of sheepishly and says, well, Mark, I think I brought this thing in. I said, well, tell me the story, would you please? And he said, well, you know, I'm a retired automotive engineer, worked all my life in Detroit. In the mid-90s is when we started bringing in tons and tons of parts from China. And so in China what happens is that there's two native species of ash. They're both resistant to the emerald ash borer, but they don't really have very good form. And so what they did is they brought over green ash as a street tree, and they planted green ash. Well, green ash is susceptible. Green ash dies. Waste not, want not. Cut it into planking, pack your parts in it, boom, here they go to America. China is one of the biggest markets for American ash right now. It has to be treated before it goes over to China. Since that time, since the mid-90s, it's spread to 15 states, 2 provinces, primarily by firewood and nursery stock. Basically, any kind of material that would harbor live insects is brought inadvertently by people all over the place. By the way, this is a little bit small, I think, for the average emerald ash borer, but it gives you an idea of the size. It's not very big. And if you're out in the woods in ash forest and they're flying around, they're sort of like mosquitoes. They actually are really fast flyers. They buzz all around. Life cycle. Eggs are laid in June and July. Basically, they bore through the bark. Here you can see an egg came through, gets into the phloem tissue, and grows 4 instars. Here's a good example of the larvae right here. You can tell all members of the genus Agrylus because they have nested bells on the posterior part of the larvae. There's other insects under the bark of ash that might look similar, like a cerambycid. Cerambicids sort of look like horseshoe nails, whereas this one has the nested bells on the back. And also, it's sort of uncanny. The snake-like pattern, I mean, it's like, even though you might have hundreds of them in the bark under the tree, and you peel the bark off and all you have is frass that falls down, you can still see, in some places, that really nice snaky-like gallery thing. It's really interesting. So they grow through the summer and fall. Then as soon as it gets cold, they get into the pre-pupal stage. And this is the problem right here. By the way, why it bends over itself before it pupates, I have no idea. It's really sort of, I'd like to see somebody explain that one. The problem is that it likes to pupate in the wood. It goes down about a ½ inch, and then in the spring it turns into a pupa. That's the way it gets transported. You can take all the bark off the thing, and it'll be still happy as a clam underneath that bark, in the wood there. So spring comes around, April, it's probably looking like this. Then May, it'll come out and makes the typical D-shaped exit hole. Everybody talks about that as being a great character for identifying emerald ash borer. It sucks. Basically, because there are cerambicids that will come out as well, just a little bit larger, and they come out at an angle, and it looks sort of like a D-shaped hole or whatever. I get so many false positives of people saying, oh, I have D-shaped holes, no problem. It doesn't, it's not a good character. I try and de-emphasize it. So the adult emerges, they'll mate. The females will feed for 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, maturing her ovaries. She'll lay about 100 eggs. The problem with this bug is that this bug loves to fly. They have flight mills. You ever heard of a flight mill where they have like a balanced wire on a pivot point? They'll actually glue the insect to the end of the flight mill, and say, giddy up. It'll go around and around and around. Every time it goes around, it'll tack it on a revolution. And so they found some females to fly up to 20 miles after resting and whatever, but just one female, 20 miles. That's an interesting figure to have in your mind. Does it happen in reality? I doubt it. But still, I think I've seen, and what my colleagues in the Midwest believe as well, there's a certain portion of the population, maybe the biggest, fattest females, they're just hell-bent on dispersal. It's like you find a population that they're all nice and contained and sort of in the same area, then all of a sudden, 2 miles away, you'll find a tree that's infested. And that just happened in Bath. So it's like, I know that's very likely, but have we followed them for that 2 miles? No. So most of them, though, will probably stay easily within 100 yards, depending on the amount of food that's available. I'm going to quickly go through the movement of this insect from 2003. In 2003, they looked around, and this is where it was. How long it's been there? They're saying maybe 10 years. I think it's probably more than that, just judging from my experience here. But it's every time you find one of these spots, it's probably been there for 3 or 4 years or more. As time goes on and we become better detectors, the lag time for detection becomes less and less. But at the beginning, it's like they're finding big, huge areas. They were there for easily 5 years beforehand. And then it's like, was this one was here a long time. They finally discovered it. 2006, this was nursery stock movement. The aphis was definitely all over this. The guy's out of business now. It was a deliberate movement of nursery stock. 2008, down here in West Virginia. Watch the Chicago area now. Missouri, nursery stock as well. Oh, here it's all the way up in Montreal. Ottawa. Right up there. Pennsylvania, 2009. 2009 was a good year. Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then we got our first infestation in Cattaraugus County. 2010 was a banner year for the emerald ash borer, as was 2011. So these dots have not diminished in size. They just have one dot for each county now. They're just tired of dealing with this. So it's a pretty big area, right? I mean, geez, you look at that, it's like crazy. But you look at it in relationship to the total distribution of ash, and it's actually not that big. Then you think about it. Overall, there's over 6,000 detections in the United States. Ash occupies over 4,000 square kilometers. The quarantine area represents only 700,000 or 760,000 square kilometers. Okay, 18% of the area is in quarantine. Okay? Within that 18%, the counties in the quarantine represent only 9% of the area, about half of it. And if you think about it also, okay, so we have the counties, Cattaraugus County. I would say less than 1% of Cattaraugus County is infested. Same with all the rest of the counties in the state. So this number is actually much smaller than 9%. So what does that say? Is it a big, huge area? No. We're actually at the very beginning of this thing. Now's the time, I think, when we can have an impact. A lot of people are saying, oh man, look at that quarantine. And indeed, you look at it in New York State, the quarantine is over half of the state. I get so much input by people saying, well, it's already here, why bother? Why worry about it? And it's like, not enough is it emphasized that less than 1% of New York's forests are currently infested. We need that, we need people to know that so that we can get political traction to implement our management strategy. In 2011, it was very interesting. You've seen those purple sticky traps, right? We call them Barney traps. I love you, you love me, let's go squish some EAB. That came from Albany, by the way. But anyway, so 65,000 Barney traps out there. They're really lousy traps. They don't work very well. But I used to disdain them. It's like, oh, why bother? But many of our infestations in New York State have been detected by that trap. And so I no longer disdain it totally. But it has its use. It's all we have, by the way. There's no sex pheromone that's been discovered. If we had a sex pheromone, put that in the Barney trap, those things would be golden. They're not. We don't have that. All we have are host volatiles. And it makes sense. The genus Agralis, very loyal to the host plant itself. You get things like the Asian longhorn beetle, very broad host preference. They have a sex pheromone that's been identified, and hopefully those traps will work this year. But we'd have nothing like that to the emerald ash borer. So, oh shit. Like that? I was going to say, it would be the most embarrassing thing in the world if that phone did that, and I was going to turn it off. I'm sorry. So, getting back to it. 2011, 65,000 traps were put out all around the area here, around the quarantine areas, not in them. No new states were recorded. Very interesting. And only 56 new county records were found. 2 were from the grid survey with the Barney traps put out in the grid pattern. Only 2. 33 from high-risk sites like campgrounds and stuff. 21 from public reports. Outreach is working. People are recognizing the signs and symptoms, and they're reporting it. I think that's really great. I wish it was a lot more, and that's actually what I'm working on in my project. So what does this say, though? It says that maybe we do have a handle on it finally. There's not a lot of change going on right now. This thing moves, but it doesn't move really rapidly by itself. And if we get on the firewood thing, maybe we can slow it down. This is at the very beginning of the thing. I have hope now. I finally have hope. You should have seen me, remember me 3 years ago? Oh gosh, I hate this thing. But I do have hope now. I like this picture. This is a risk assessment done by the Forest Health Technology Enterprise team in Fort Collins, Colorado. And they're trying to get smart about trap placement. And so they looked at this and they said, okay, what are our risks? New York has more ash than any other state in the nation to begin with, okay? And this is the center of white ash. So we're nice and red. And we have a lot of people also, and a lot of people travel, and a lot of people bring firewood. That's why I think there's so much effort being put into New York. I'm sort of surprised that it's so green here in Pennsylvania, especially in the northern tier, but I think that part of it is, this is based on likelihood of detection uncertainty, ash species distribution, and campground locations. So this is sort of like their strategy. Where do we need to go with this? I just like the fact that New York is nice and red, and we need to pay attention. So what are we doing in the state? We're classifying our populations according to where we are on this curve, typical population curve. We have Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Another way to look at it, Tier 1 is very close to the origin, although, it's like this thing does disperse. And so that tail goes out nice and long. Tier 2, the populations are building, and it's going out further. Tier 3, it's already evacuated the area around where it started, and the populations, tail should probably go way out here. Pest pressure is the most important thing to think about when you're looking at management for this bug. It's it's very simple. The number of individual bugs attacking a tree determines how quickly a tree will be killed. You've got a lot of bugs on it, it'll kill it really quickly, very few. I've seen some trees that have been infested 7 years. Still have green canopies on them. It's just, 1 or 2 here. That's where the populations are just beginning. But then you go to the Tier 3 populations, 1 to 2 years, and they're dead. That's it. Canopy symptoms, everything really quickly. It's really a critical factor in management decisions. Pest detection is it. Detection at low pest pressure is so difficult. But if we can get to that point, we have a lot more management options available. The timing of management decisions, pesticide effectiveness also varies with pest pressure. Tier 3, we have Ulster Green counties, 125 square miles right now. That's the only one we have. Tier 2, Tri-Li, Lancaster, Randolph, and Bath, only about a 1.5 mile radius. Very small infestations. Then we get Tier 1. We have a lot of Tier 1s. I'm amazed that we have so many Tier 1s. It's so difficult to detect them. Caledonia, about 12 trees were taken out. Rochester, in the middle of Rochester, 12 trees. South Park, south of Buffalo, 7 trees were found and taken out and shipped. Then we have Pembroke, West Point, and Bethlehem, Albany County. Got bugs in the trap, no trees yet. I don't know why. It's the weirdest thing in the world. We must walk on water sometimes. There's just gives you an idea of the ash distribution in the state. We don't have much in the middle of the Adirondacks, but the twin tiers here, southern tier, northern tier, there's so much ash there. But then when you look at it, these areas, the wetlands in the Ontario plain are just packed with green ash and black ash. When you look at countywide, the percentage of ash in these counties by just the total basal area of trees is so high, 28% in Niagara County, 28, 22, 20, 20. It's just an amazing percentage. It's like they don't have a lot of trees up there, but a lot of them are ash. And you get into those wetland areas, and this is one of the things that I worry about. You've got those wetland areas that are so important to habitat. A lot of those stands are like 100% ash. And it's right there. We're right there right now. These are the infestations that we have. This is the big behemoth here in the mid-Hudson area, 125 square miles. These, with no bugs yet, no trees yet detected. Bath is just expanding. You know, this is the closest one to us right here. It's now expanded about a mile and a half, whereas it was just a few hundred, about 100 trees in a very localized area last year. And we were thinking, oh man, you know, it's like this thing's no problem. Then we get these things. This one in southern Monroe County is just about to go crazy. We've caught them about 10 miles away from that point. This one in Buffalo, it's the most urban of all the infestations, and it's about a mile and a half we caught it away from the point of origin. And then Randolph down here, the first one in the state, again, it's about a mile and a half, maybe more. We've caught it about 2 miles away. But these are all very, relatively small infestations. Most of the state, we don't even need to worry. How fast is this going to move? I don't really know unless people start carrying wood around. So do you need to rush out there and cut down all your ash trees? I wouldn't. They grow really fast. If it takes 10 years to get to your stand, you're going to get a considerable amount of volume on there. And if we cut down all our ash trees, how are we going to know if there's any resistance? It's like I'm hoping that we're going to find resistance. In the Midwest right now, there are stragglers that are surviving. They've been identified, and currently the Forest Service is working on them to try and figure out if they are indeed resistant. Here's the Ulster County Mid-Hudson infestation. It's like it was really weird. We got two bugs on one of those purple traps, and we started to look around, and pretty soon we realized that thing has just been absolutely gone bazonkers. My feeling is that maybe somebody was moving out from Detroit to get a job at IBM. They had a little bit of room left in their moving van, so they threw in the firewood from their backyard and moved in there to Kingston. We figure it might have started right around this area here. It's in the park. What are we supposed to do in the park? The blue line has been breached. Can't cut trees in the park. They have to make a decision because they're right now, just ready to get going there. Here's southern Monroe County, about a mile and a half, right near Rochester. Rochester has 15,000 ash trees as street trees. Do you know how much it costs to remove an ash tree in a situation like that? You're talking $500 minimum probably. And that's if you don't have any, you're not encumbered by lines or having a house nearby or whatever. Dealing with this is an economic hardship, and you know what? The biggest thing is it's a public health hazard with ash trees when they fall down. And that's the biggest deal. Ash, they don't fall down daintily like oaks. Oaks will stay standing for a long time. Their little branches will come down here and there. Ash, after 1 year, begin to fall down in chunks. Just talk to city foresters in the Midwest. Almost every single one of them has lawsuits pending right now with chunks of trees that have fallen down on cars, and indeed there's cases of people being injured as well. So it's a really big problem for cities. Buffalo, this one is in the urban area, and they've been doing a lot of work there. It's really impressive what they've been doing in Buffalo. But right here is a big, huge wetland, about 500 acres, almost 100% ash, and it's at the edge of that. I'm really curious to see how fast the population is going to build, and then how far they're going to go from that point. It's just like having a nice big box of tinder for your fire, and you have that match just right at the edge of it. It's interesting. Here's Randolph. Speaking of having the match at the edge of tinder, it's like here we have Allegheny State Park, just huge. Lots of big, huge trees in there. It'll be there shortly. This is where we've actually been doing a lot of work. When we first got the emerald ash borer, we initiated some research on our strategy, what we call SLAM, slow ash mortality. That was thought of by the people in Michigan, by the way, not by us. I don't want to take credit for such a great thing. But basically, with Melissa Firkin and John Vandenberg and Jerry Carlson at DEC, I got together and we decided to try and implement slow ash mortality. It's really simple. It's Neanderthal entomology, basically. You survey, early detection is the key, absolute key. Using visual signs and symptoms and purple traps in girdled trees, not with the bait on them, but you girdle a tree, immediately becomes attractive. Why, I don't know, but somehow the chemistry changes immediately and the bugs go for it. And then we try population reduction by removing the infested trees and by creating attractive clusters of girdled trees that we call sinks. And we come in afterwards and remove those and destroy them. So it's simple. Girdled trees in the middle here, all the bugs coming out of the infested trees, we're thinking we'll go to the girdled trees because they're more attractive. Then they won't come to these uninfested trees. What we found was that indeed that worked. There was a significant difference between the amount of bugs in the girdled trees as opposed to the uninfested trees surrounding it. It was really apparent at low numbers of bugs. There was more bugs in the infested trees when there were more bugs around, which sort of makes sense, but it was still a significant difference. So we've shown that this technique does work, and this is what we're using this year in many of the other infestations to try and basically, the reproductive effort will go into these girdled trees. We know where those girdled trees are, then we just go into those girdled trees and we chip them up. Very nice and simple, Neanderthal entomology. This is what we did actually in Monroe County. It was 40 acres of almost 100% ash, pole size, some saw logs. We got this operator to come in with a feller buncher. It was amazing how fast it operated. Had to make it into chips. The thing is like there's no market for chips in New York right now. Can you believe it? It's like we actually had the chips that we took from Bath, we had to put in a landfill. We couldn't sell them. We had to pay to get rid of them. Luckily, this guy found a market for the chips, but he had to debark it first. So we got a flailer debarker, ran it through that, and he put it in the chipper and shipped it off. That was for pellets. Really, that is one of the biggest problems we have in implementing our management right now, is we have no market for those chips, and so that's why I mention it wherever I go. Another one of the things that I'm working on as part of my outreach is developing first detectors. First detection is so critical in the management to get in there and be able to remove those bugs. It's like, okay, think about the number of bugs you have in a tree. Okay, you have maybe 100 per meter squared, and you maybe have in a tree about like this, maybe 10 meters of bark surface area. That's a lot of bugs. 100 times 100, it's 10,000 bugs that you're taking out. And if they lay 100 eggs each, it's 5,000 times 100, it's a half. So basically you're removing a heck of a lot of reproductive potential just by taking out one tree. I think it's worth it. So if we can find them fast, we're in good shape. So I've got a grant from the Northeast IPM program to develop training modules for EAB first detectors. Yes, you too can have a badge. But there are a lot of, one of the most frustrating things I've dealt with is doing my talks and having people come to the talk and they want to do something. And they say, what can I do? And so the standard thing is learn the signs and symptoms, talk to your neighbors, call the telephone number, which nobody answers, by the way. It's like, it's really crazy. So the first step is to get this first detectors program going and get people engaged in the process. And then in the end, I'm going to bring up the fact that out of my frustration, I decided my effort is going to go into creating local task forces so that these volunteers have a place to go to. They can latch into the local task forces and their efforts will not go for want. They'll have somebody there to say, yes, we need you to go to this location and look for bugs. Visual signs and symptoms, they vary with pest pressure, bark splitting, woodpecker foraging, canopy thinning, epicormic sprouting. Canopy thinning is one that a lot of people, you go to the websites, they say look for canopy. By the time you get to canopy thinning, you already have an infestation that's been there 5 or 6 years, and it's going bazonkers. You really want to get woodpecker foraging. Bark splitting is, you're walking on water if you can find bark splitting, but woodpecker foraging is really good, and there it is. It's easy to see, especially when the trees are wet. It just shows up like night and day, and you see in these little places where they've reached in and grabbed out a larvae. It's really easy to see. Here's some. What does this tell you? This is Ulster County, a cohort of bugs. When I first saw this tree, there was no indication at all that it was infested. I went back in October, it was just absolutely hammered, if you excuse the pun. Little spots right in there, you can see where it's reached in. It's a really great character. This is low infestation here, this is Monroe County, full-size timber in that stand where they log. You can see here and there the signs where the woodpeckers have foraged. The woodpeckers are amazing. I've stripped trees of bark and found that only where the woodpeckers are foraging were their larvae. The other places where there was no foraging, there was no larvae. It's uncanny. I love it. So I basically finally got together with people at the Lab of Ornithology, was talking to the right person, got some enthusiasm going. Now I'm hoping to get funding for a project, which I think is just absolutely phenomenal. It's the Eburg first detectors. Basically, train birders to recognize woodpecker foraging behavior, identify tree species, and recognize the signs and symptoms of existing and the underlying here right now, potentially new invasive wood borers. We're not done with this. This story is going to continue. And so we can get this tool going. I had no idea. This is an amazing thing. I mean, it's like they can detect, using this tool, they feel confident that within a 3 by 3 mile square, they can predict over a yearly, they can predict at any one point in time which birds will be there. Imagine what would happen if we could get that going for some of these invasive species. It'd be phenomenal. So this is like really a big step. I'm really looking forward to this, if we can find the funding. Control options, basically resistance and biocontrol are the two things that you need in a native population. There's no resistance. I'm hoping there might be. This is actually a green ash that we found up in Rochester. And these are really abnormally small attacks from what I've seen. And so I'm thinking, maybe there's a chance. Maybe, we do have some resistance. We just need to have the smarts to know which trees they are. Right now they've done crosses with the resistant species from China, and now they're doing back crosses to bring back in more of the American species characters. It'll take time, but they're doing it. They're working on it as hard as they can at the Forest Service lab in Ohio. Biological control, I love it. There are 4 parasitic wasps from China already in culture. 3 of them have been licensed for release. 2 of them have been released at New York locations, and another one will be releasing this year. One's an egg parasitoid, and there's 2 larval parasitoids. The problem is the bark on ash is really thick. And if you have to oviposit through the bark to get to the larvae, a good portion of the ones in the very thick bark trees are not available. So maybe when the population of trees actually gets to be have thin bark, is going to be able to assert more influence in population regulation. Also, native parasitoids and predators. I found 2 beetles underneath the bark of the tree, native predators. And I've also found one parasitoid, and there's another one from the Midwest that apparently is present on other agrila species, and it switches over to the emerald ash borer in the later part of the population buildup and can assert a really great degree of control. So my question is, well, let's see. I wonder if we can sort of like girdle a bunch of trees around here, maybe poplars, and try and build up the populations of that Attanocaulus before the emerald ash borer gets here. I don't know. There's things we still need to try. I'm looking for anybody to volunteer their poplar trees for this experiment. Pesticides are effective. Not all pesticides. Weak ones work in the pre and post infestation. Only one pesticide works in the heavy infestations. One of the things about pesticides is that it's like they can be very useful for minimizing the cost to communities. The red line is the cost of replacing all the trees over a certain period of time, and then boom, the line goes out. The black line here is replacing all the trees as this is. Oh, by the way, this is a model done by Cliff Sadoff at Purdue. He says it's the single best thing he's ever thought of in his life. It really is an amazing tool. But basically, if you replace the trees as they die, look how high your costs get, and then they come down here to nothing. But if you use pesticides, you can spread the cost out over time, and you can save some of the trees. The significant thing is that you can save a significant amount of the canopy using the pesticides to preserve your trees. This is assuming you're working on 50% of the trees. And you look at the cumulative amount, it does come up here finally to meet the cumulative amount of the others, but it's spread out over a 25-year period of time. So it's a tool that's being integrated into the management of emerald ash borer, and it's something that needs to be looked at. Oh, here are the benefits, but I'm going to go over that now. one of the interesting things, like, all the different stakeholders get involved, and I'm really impressed with what the Nature Conservancy's been doing. I don't know if you're all familiar with the Continental Dialogue on non-native forest insects and diseases, but it's a great thing. It's just amazing getting everybody together, and our focus is, what do we do? Where do we go in the future? How do we limit importation? How do we engage other constituencies? It's just a fabulous thing. They have the Don't Move Firewood campaign, just really great campaign. They produced a movie, Lurking in the Trees, which is very entertaining, and then Plant Smart. It's just, they've done a lot of work, but I think one of the most valuable things for me in doing research is a study that they supported. They did one on Asian longhorn beetle, and they discovered, getting economists together with forest entomologists, they came up with a number of $600 billion of total impact of the Asian longhorn beetle. Now that number has been used to shake loose this year $50 million to try and control it in Massachusetts. The interesting thing about this study is they just looked at all non-native forest insects. They found that the costs are largely borne by homeowners and municipal governments, not by timber companies. Wood and foam-boarding insects are anticipated to cause the largest economic impacts by annually inducing nearly $1.7 billion. Annually inducing $1.7 billion in local government expenditures and approximately $830 million annually in lost residential property values. I mean, those numbers are huge. And that's just the wood and foam-boarding insects. And also, the thing that's really sobering, though, I mean, these guys are some of my good friends, and they're not dumb. And they came up with this number. There's a 32% chance that another highly destructive boar species will invade the U.S. in the next 10 years. That's just like, looking at the numbers here, looking at the expenditures, I mean, they have some really good numbers. Just broken down in percentages, the timber loss is what, 3%, 4%? All the costs are basically on government, local government expenditures, 50%, household expenditures, 20%, and residential property loss. That's taking care of this dead tree that you're obligated to take care of because it's a public health hazard. It's just, the numbers are huge. And that's what we're dealing with here in New York State, especially New York State. I mean, you go out there and look around. It's like, if you haven't been looking for ash trees, do it. There are a lot out there. And my current outreach focus, the thing I'm really trying to get going, are the local EAB task forces. We have 3 up and running in the hardest hit areas. It's really interesting. This is a study in human nature. Why do you get involved in a task force, a local task force? Buffalo is all over it. I had a conference call today, and we spent 2 hours, and it was just back and forth. It was attended by city officials, by county officials, parks, foresters, private landowners. I mean, it was like really, really cool. And then you go to Monroe County in Rochester, and it's hard to get anybody into a room. What's going on? Rochester, they have 15,000 street trees. They have so many street trees. They're so exposed. And yet, it's like they're still arguing on, well, who's going to take the lead? Then you go to Livingston County and you got people, it's like rural county, they're all over it. I mean, you got committed individuals. You go to Cattaraugus County and people are shrugging their shoulders and saying, oh, they're all going to die? Okay. That's a great place for intermunicipal cooperation. Identify priorities, resources, and cooperate in obtaining those resources. I saw that today in the conference call. They're all over getting together, forming a template for writing grants to get money to treat the trees. And I think it's really important that they have a reliable place to get information. There's so many people out there now trying to sell pesticides, and they know everything. They really do. I'll be the first to admit I don't know anything almost. And it's a place for volunteers to go. I really think these local task forces, once they get going. Well, there's one in Tompkins County too. Very interesting. My favorite cartoon. Got to thank Holly Manager for this cartoon. She was traveling in Wisconsin and she saw this in the Green Bay paper and she tore it out and brought it back to me. I contacted the cartoonist, who's a really great guy, and he says, yeah, sure, we'll use it anytime. I'd like to thank my sponsors, USDA APHIS PPQ, which has really been foresighted in their outreach efforts. The Forest Service has been funding our research. DEC has been incredibly cooperative, and Cornell's put up with me really well. Questions? I promise I'll turn off my phone next time. David?
Mark, in the areas where the hemlock adelgid has been for a while, is there any evidence of resistance, which then breeders could try and pick up and make new individuals?
You know, it's like, I think, yes, there are trees that people feel have found that are resistant. Right now, they're doing field trials in Providence, University of Rhode Island. You know, it's always the problem. It's like, why did that tree survive? And you know, it's something actually that I've been scratching my head out. Actually, it's what got me interested in forest entomology. It's basically you see two trees, one right next to another, one's dead and one's alive. But you have to really prove, you know, that this is that really is resistant, and that takes time. Yes, there's the possibility. I have hope, but not very much. I mean, not very much resistance. I think that right now, with Hemlock Adelgid, we really need to pay attention to our resources, prioritize our valuable stands, identify potential, trees that we need to preserve the genetic resources on, get them treated. The two-pronged approach, actually, that I've been talking to people about is treating the big trees in the stand, the big ones that have genetic representatives of genetic success in one place for a long period of time. Treat those trees, keep those genes alive. Young trees can actually support populations for a pretty long period of time, much longer than the old trees. And you keep those untreated as insectaries to grow the beetles, to grow the predators. And so you put the predators in the stand, they grow on the adelgids, on the young trees, while the big trees are still are protected. And you might need to treat like a couple times, maybe do a couple of releases of predators. But that's the tactic I think that we're going to be following in this area in New York.
It's been a long time since I read Dickens' book, Tale of Two Arthropods. I remember there was a line, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I wonder if you take a big picture view of this, going back, 25, 30 years, and look at where we were on managing invasives and where we are now and where we might be in 10 or 15 years, does it look like we're on a trajectory to have some optimism?
That's a really good question. I like the Tale of Two Arthropods. You noticed the theme. I think that we are moving in the direction. It's like getting, I think the scientists are realizing the gravity of the situation. And invasive species in general I remember, when I first started grad school, it was like a new concept almost. That was, way back in the late 70s. It was something we were just thinking about, and it wasn't even on my radar. And now look where it is. And it's like now we've got some really serious problems to deal with, and I think we are developing tools. Luckily, it's like it's a disaster, but it's not an incredible disaster. We are managing to hold on to the genes of some of these trees. I think we have techniques in place, and we're getting smart about education, and hopefully that will shake loose money to regulate importation and to implement the rules that are already in place involving importation of wood materials from other countries. So yes, I think we are better off, and I think we're going in the right direction. We're lucky that we had the good old days where there was a lot of money for these projects. I don't know what's going to happen now. The Emerald Ash Borer project actually, as of this October, will be cut 2/3.
Well, thank you for that compelling. It was interesting for me all the way through. Oh, good. But there was something you said which to you may have been tangent, but it was really interesting. You said that it's a study in human nature, and you were looking at how certain regions are responding in particular ways. And doing a survey won't help us figure out what the character of that nature is, because it's people's behavior in specific contexts. It requires observation. So it would be worthwhile for you, I think, that there would be an aspect of your research or grant where you could build in how regions are responding to the crisis or to the threat. Because the same kind of issue can be related to the question of climate change, which is at a much greater scale. So we just need to watch within New York State what were the factors that lead one group of people to completely engage, whereas others to be apathetic and give up, or everything in between. Because I don't think there is one or the other. There's a number of, it'd be an interesting way to sort of tease out those behavioral factors, because it may help us explain to deal with larger problems.
I agree, and that goes to your question as well. And that comment was thrown in there for you. I agree. It's been fascinating. I don't have the time.
But you can think about building collaborations with others.
Yes, I can. I'm very welcome to entertain any collaborations. But it is fascinating. I think with all the bugs I've ever worked on from the very beginning of my career, it's like people just don't get it until it hits them between the eyeballs. Really, it's like you don't get it until you see all those dead trees in your backyard. Very few people, I think, I've ever met, even very intelligent people, even myself. It doesn't. When I finally get up to Monroe County and start looking at some of those dead trees, then I go, oh man, that's what it's about. And so it's like I think there's a lot of things at play. The emotional aspect of really realizing how much is at stake is difficult to comprehend. But I'm very happy to talk with you more about that and plan out some schemes. Yes.
Speaking about collaborations, I work with communities in Maine where basket makers rely solely on black ash to make their baskets. And they've been doing a lot of preventative measures because they've been concerned about this threat, even though it's not in Maine per se, it goes right across the border, collecting seeds for seed banks, doing all sorts of other things. But I'm wondering if you have reached out to having collaborations with, like, say, the Akwesasne Mohawk Reserve, where there's also a lot of basket makers and a lot of ash, and they already have an ash program.
I have not. Speaking of your question, it's remarkable how foresighted the tribes are in preservation of black ash. I've been very impressed, all the way up into northern Minnesota and Wisconsin. They've really been proactive in their. It's like the shining example of what it takes to be proactive, to try and save this resource for the long term. It's like unless we have those seeds, we have nothing. The future is totally empty, and it's one of the things I want to start get going on a wider basis. But I wish I could clone myself. Doesn't everybody?
Well, there's Tony David, who's a graduate of this program, now works for the Akwesasne Natural Resource Department. So there's a natural link that's just waiting to be.
Okay. I'm all over it. Any more questions? Everybody else wants to go. I wasn't controversial enough.
Very informative.
Thanks, everybody.